Hi everyone, my name is Amy O'Sullivan and welcome to my presentation on water scarcity, how to replenish a declining water supply in the San Joaquin and San Francisco River Valley in California. For my project, I modeled the current supply and demand of the San Joaquin and San Francisco River Valley, and I implemented a policy in which water could be conserved. And so for some background information, the San Joaquin and San Francisco River Valley is a huge agricultural area. Over 2/3 of the US fruit market and 1/3 of the US vegetable market is produced and grown in this area. So this area relies heavy on water for agriculture, as well as 25 million people live in this area and depend on the water for their day-to-day water usage and water survival. And so these rivers and groundwater supply in this area has been exploited by humans for over a century. So the health of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers has suffered the impact of hundreds of dams, levees stretching thousands of miles, and countless water diversions. So not only have these rivers been pumped in their main pathways, there's also side pathways created from human development to pump more water out in areas that couldn't get direct pumps to the river. So besides overpumping of fresh water, another way their supply is getting depleted is from salinization. So because they're depleting the river, the level of the river has been decreasing, and ocean sea levels have been increasing due to climate change. And so when the level of the ocean is higher than the level of the river that's going into the ocean at the mouth, the ocean water comes into the river. And when salt water mixes with fresh water, it just all becomes salt water. And so that salinizes that part of the river, and pesticides and chemicals used by farmers that go into the river also contaminate the river and fresh water. So not only are they overpumping, water supply is also being contaminated and becoming unusable. And so right here, you can see how badly we are overpumping this water. And so Lake Oroville wasn't really fully being pumped until right after July 2011. As you can see here, the water level has severely dropped. I mean, you see the edge of the tree line down. And this is just one part of the lake. This lake's much bigger than what you can see right here. And so this really shows how badly farmers have been pumping for agriculture and that humans have been pumping for their own usage. And again, right here, you can see the line everywhere where the water once went up to. And right here is a hydroelectric dam that's not in use anymore, because as you can see here, water is supposed to enter at these grates. And well, it's not being entered because the water has been pumped. And so the hydroelectric plant has been shut down, as it has in many different areas of California. And so for my Vensim model, I took data from the US Department of Interior Bureau of Reclamation. And so they created this huge document where they analyzed the supply and demand of the river valley. And they did that in partnership with the California Department of Water Resources, as well as many other agencies who are really concerned about the water supply in California, which they really should be, as it's depleting at a rapid rate. And so I used their data from current trends for socioeconomic scenarios. So that means that they took into account population trends and urban population density in California when making their projections. So I used their projections from 2015 to 2039. And so I used 5 different climate scenarios in my model. So I used their central tendency scenario, which was just your average, like year to year rainfall, year to year demand. You're not in a period of like dry drought, or you're not in a period of wet, heavy rainfall. And then I used 4 other scenarios: a warm, dry scenario, a hot, dry scenario, a hot, wet, and a warm, wet. And so warm, dry, hot, dry was periods of a lot less rainfall on average, and hot, wet, warm, wet was periods of a lot more rainfall than average. And the difference between why we have hot and warm is that demand of water actually changed based on the temperature outside on average. So that's why I have those 4 different scenarios. And so one assumption I made in my model before I show you my model is that water supply starts at 0. I'm not trying to refill these rivers. I'm not trying to replenish the river. There's really no going back. As you can see from how much we've overpumped, it would take centuries to refill that Oroville. So I'm not trying to replenish the supply in the rivers. I am trying to find a way to help mitigate the overpumping. So as you can see here, this is my basic model. And so it takes a random number from the uniform distribution, and that picks the year type. So the central tendency type has a probability of occurring 60% of the time. It's most likely to occur. It's from year to year, like average. And then each other water type has a probability of 10% chance of happening. And so based on the year type, and then assigns the supply of fresh water, and then supplies a demand of fresh water. And so as you can see here, the needed imported water supply is when we have a year where demand is higher than supply. And so we have to import water. And this isn't really practical, importing this much water. Like 3,600 taps is very impractical to import. All the surrounding states are in the same boat as California, Arizona, Nevada, and they're experiencing periods of drought, and they're over pumping as well. So, importing water would be very costly, very expensive, and it just wouldn't be possible to get all this water to California. So when a lot of times when there's droughts, they have a lot of water restrictions. And then you can see here that every time we have a bump up into ocean, we had a period of wet. So it was fresh water that left the lakes and rivers without being pumped out. And so it was unused. And then once it goes in the ocean, it is salinized. So from this, I decided to implement a policy where we closely tracked weather patterns and water levels of the rivers. So once you had a few days of heavy precipitation, even just a few days of heavy precipitation or a day, and the water level rises, because precipitation accompanies water level rising, you would pump out, I said, half that water. So half of the water in excess of the supply and demand, right? So I kept the normal supply and demand equal, not equal, but kept their basic ones during that year type. And so anything excess of supply, we pumped out half of it and stored it in water supply. And in storing that, I would hope to accumulate enough water so when there was a period of drought, the state of California could survive off their pumped water, at least for a little bit, or help reduce how much water they need to pump in or transport in, because it's a very expensive, costly process that is not really reasonable to sustainably do for a long period of time. So here is my storage simulator. So as you can hear, I added in an exported storage area. And so what this does is when water is not being used, we have excess water, we pumped out half of it. So you can see here through each simulation, which I have 3 simulations, by the way. I'm not sure I actually said that. So I have seed 1, 2, and 3. So I've randomly generated 3 different seeds of random numbers to pick the year types. And so this is the exported water. And so as you can see here, we have water supply increasing by implementing this policy. And so important thing to note, which is pretty cool, is that after 8 years, my policies, we're looking at this blue line right here, we end up having to import some water. But again, you can see it's not as much water. So right off the bat in Sim 2, you can see here that we had a period of dry period. So we need to import water basically right off the bat. However, after, and it took us a while to recover from that because it was right off the bat, we didn't have any water stored up. However, after 8 years of water storing up, we had to technically import some water. However, it was manageable and was maybe a third, a fourth of what we would have to pump in normally. And so this just already shows me that my model is working. And then to kind of verify how well the state of California could do in a drought. And so I took the values at the end of these 20 years. So you had 20 years of random rainfall and precipitation. And so at the end of 20 years, I took that value and simulated a drought. So water supply started at about 18-ish thousand and taps, and it lasted almost 5 years. So for 5 years, almost, the state of California could survive a drought without having to rely on the importation of water. And this is without implementing any policies of water conservation. So when there's periods of drought, the state of California goes into a state of emergency and they implement policies in which people are restricted on how much water they can use. And I didn't put that in here. And I'm only pumping out half the water too that we have in excess by monitoring these rivers too. So this is only half the water. And so I think that if you pumped more water or you put in those emergency procedures, you could last even longer. And just to note here, I know you're probably thinking, well, the water supply starts coming back up. Water stops pumping out of the water supply after like year 0, just based on how I programmed the model. So the water does make a recovery, but it's a false recovery. I'm not pumping out any more water. The water supply, if continued, would just straight deplete. So yeah, my policy did have a great effect on the current supply and demand in the state of California and the San Joaquin and San Francisco River Valley. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at my poster. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day.